we're here with Courtney Moran, Chief Legislative Strategist for Agricultural Hemp Solutions. So tell me how you got started in the federal space for hemp legislation.
It actually started right after I started engaging with the hemp industry, and when I hosted my very first Hemp History Week event in 2014, I reached out to the Oregon congressional delegation to see if they could attend my event or if they could just provide some support for the hopeful hemp industry in Oregon. And the response was incredible. While none of the members were actually able to come and physically attend the event in person, one of them actually recorded a video encouraging engagement within the industry and showing their support. Another wrote a letter and just continued from then to engage with me and talk with me about the development. But it was right at the very beginning of my career that I made that connection with the congressional delegation and really started our conversations about what a full legalization framework would look like.
Great. And so you started really kind of right on in the Farm Bill process, right? That was kind of your first leap into that federal realm.
That was my first leap into the federal realm. And so it was actually in the end of the production season in 2016 when Senator Wyden had his agricultural staffer come out to one of the hemp fields in Oregon. And she came out, she visited a location, and we all started talking about what is working for the program, what isn't working for the program, what could the federal government do to become more supportive of hemp. And that's where our conversations on the Hemp Farming Act really began.
That's incredible that they were literally in the fields. You always want that from a representative to know that they're like hands in the dirt, feet on the ground. You know?
Absolutely.
Great. So what did it start to look like when you got into writing the Farm Bill and kind of getting involved in that process?
So we started sharing drafts in early 2017. I was actually in Washington, D.C. for the Vote Hemp Lobby Day. We had some of our members from the Oregon Industrial Hemp Farmers Association attending the Lobby Day. We had a booth in House Rayburn building, and we had different members come and attend. There were a lot of different stakeholders from the hemp industry there, and Senator Wyden showed up, and he and I had time to have a little sidebar conversation, and at that point I went to their office and we started working on drafts from then. And for the next year plus, we actually started going draft by draft, back and forth. I was flying out to DC, meeting with his office. We started coordinating directly with Senator McConnell's office.
Oh.
And so it was Senator Wyden's staff, and Senator McConnell's staff, and we were going draft by draft, talking about a lot of the different nuances, the definition of hemp, the testing clause. It was Senator Wyden's office and I that worked very specifically to secure that language or similarly reliable methods within the testing clause. And then we were working with a lot of other offices, both within the Senate and the House. And now it wasn't just me. There were a lot of stakeholders engaged at this point.
Right.
We had many folks from Kentucky. We had other organizations. We had stakeholders from around the country, some leadership coming out of Virginia as well, and South Carolina, and really showing up to the Capitol, engaging with their delegation, and also using these key stakeholders and key farmers to connect with their representatives. And so as constituents, the stakeholders around the country were coming together and working with especially the members of Congress who held very specific political power and roles within different committees. And so it wasn't just the agriculture committees, but we had to engage with judiciary. We had to engage with other committees because getting to full legalization meant that we were transforming not only the Agriculture Marketing Act, but we were also transforming the Controlled Substances Act.
And you all should know that Courtney and where is Malcolm and Gary were practically a non-stop shuttle service for months and months between our office and Mitch McConnell's office and all of the members, because like so much of this, political change doesn't always start in Washington, D.C. It usually is top down. They would go make their visits, they'd work with senators, they'd build grassroots support. I'll just tell you, in effect, we would not have hemp legalization without Courtney and Malcolm. And let's give them a big shout out.
Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of broad overview, what was the push for, especially in terms of hemp in that 2018 Farm Bill?
Excellent question. And this is actually something that I think a lot of folks forget, and especially when folks are looking back to the 2018 Farm Bill and wondering, why do we have some things that have happened in the marketplace now, and why weren't certain pieces put into the Farm Bill? The problem that we were solving with the Farm Bill was to create authority for production. So historically, the Controlled Substances Act limited the cultivation and production of hemp or marijuana without having a DEA registration. And so the 2014 Farm Bill created production authority through agricultural research pilot programs. But what we needed to do was move beyond these agricultural pilot programs and the marketing research provisions, but actually get to full legalization for production. And that's the real problem that we were solving. Clearly defining hemp, moving it out of the Controlled Substances Act. And what we were also resolving was that in the implementation of the 2014 Farm Bill, DEA, USDA, and FDA put out a document called the Statement of Principles. And in the Statement of Principles, these agencies attempted to redefine industrial hemp. They attempted to limit what could be grown, what could be done with this material, how it could be transported. Nothing that was consistent with what the 2014 Farm Bill actually did. So we knew we had to send a very clear signal to these agencies what the intent was, right? And the intent was to legalize hemp production, clarify that any materials coming from hemp would be included. And so specifically, there was a lot of issues around CBD. And so clarifying that authority that, yes, it came from hemp, it's below that 0.3% threshold, that it is legal and lawful. And so that's what the framework was. That's why we added those additional descriptors within the definition of hemp, using DEA's own language to clarify, yes, these particular derivatives, cannabinoids coming from a lawful hemp plant are actually hemp. And then setting up a framework for not only states, but also tribes, which were unfortunately not included in the 2014 language, and USDA to develop plans, because we wanted to protect all of the work that had gone into all of the states that developed pilot programs, but then grant new, broader authority to the tribes and also create authority for USDA to oversee both the national program and any jurisdictions who did not want to have that primary regulatory authority. And so this 2018 Farm Bill language, which actually came out of the Hemp Farming Act of 2018, which is the bill that I specifically worked on, S2667, was the first time, other than some bills that were introduced on the House side, where a Senate Hemp Farming Act actually had prescribed regulatory framework. The others just tried to define hemp and remove it from the Controlled Substances Act definition of marijuana, but this actually set up its own regulatory framework. And so that is one piece as to why this language was successful, because it did actually have a framework. It had enforcement authority. It had buy-in from Republicans and Democrats, and it also had buy-in with the jurisdictional oversight that was given to USDA and the engagement still with the Attorney General.
Yeah, that bipartisanship I think is so unique when it comes to hemp legislation. It seems that we really can find people on both sides of the aisle agreeing and pushing to make this legislation happen.
It's one of the most amazing pieces of all of this. Of course, what's happening on the farm is where the magic is at, but that this issue, it truly is bipartisan. We have members of Congress, we have state legislators that are completely on opposite sides on almost every single issue, coming to the table, working together, sponsoring legislation together, and it's really been an amazing thing to see.
We love to see that.
Absolutely.
So, okay, you've been working on the text, going back and forth between offices to get that final version done. When did you hear that it was actually going to be introduced on the floor?
So when the bill was getting introduced, I was actually on a plane going to Alaska to meet with the governor to sign into law the legislation that we had just passed that actually legalized hemp in Alaska. So I was already on this incredible journey, and then I get word that Senator McConnell had actually introduced the Hemp Farming Act into the Senate. It was unbelievable.
And just goes to show the momentum and the amount of impact that you've had across the nation in the hemp space as well. So what was markup like? The bill gets introduced, we go into markups. How did that all play out?
Markup was another really, I'm going to say, profound moment, because the markup was in the Senate Agriculture Committee. It was Amendment 1. It was introduced by Senator McConnell. He was Senate Majority Leader at the time. He also sat on the Agriculture Committee, so to have his buy-in was the best buy-in that we could possibly have. But also, as the senator for Kentucky and Kentucky's rich hemp history, he was able to provide testimony that was very heartfelt. He told the history of hemp in Kentucky. He talked about the struggles of the tobacco farmers and the need for a new commodity crop for his farmers in the state, and that industrial hemp and hemp were going to be this next crop available to his farmers, and that he was fully supporting it because of that. And so we had really the most important man in Congress and, arguably in our federal government supporting this legislation, and he led that introduction within the Senate Agriculture Committee.
And it kind of comes back to even your journey began with those legislators really showing that they are here to support this hemp legislation, that they're willing to go to the farm, to speak on it, to know really that in-depth history, which is really incredible. So after markup, where do we see the Farm Bill take shape and go next?
So the language in S267 that was adopted as Amendment 1 did still contain controversial provisions. And, this piece of legislation was a lot of interest coming together, not only within the hemp industry, but within law enforcement, with the different agencies, with the different political parties, with the different offices. And a lot of compromises had to be made over the years. And, a few drafts back, I would say it was a little bit closer to perfect, but of course, that's never what happens with legislation. So in the period after it's adopted into the Senate Farm Bill, we were working with both the Senate and the House to create some amendments and some modifications. And one of the key modifications that we made was around the felony restrictions. And so the original proposal would have restricted anyone engaging or attempting to engage with farming and getting a growing license if they had ever had a controlled substances felony. We were able to limit that to 10 years. I actually had done a lot of research and sent to Congress an analysis of all the agricultural pilot program states, which ones had controlled substance felony restrictions, which ones did not, how long did they have, what the landscape looked like. We did compromise, and we were able to get the limited restriction that we have right now, and we are very hopeful that this is completely removed for all farmers. We know so far that we are successful in removing that felony restriction for industrial hemp producers with the Industrial Hemp Act that I've been working on, and hopefully that within the upcoming Farm Bill that is completely removed.
So what happened after those amendments were clarified?
They were clarified in the fall of 2018, and by December of 2018, we had a House version approved, we have a Senate version approved. It goes to the president's desk, and on December 20th of 2018, we fully legalized hemp in the United States.
Incredible.
It was, my life goal to legalize hemp and to be a part of it and to help lead the initiative, the narrative, work with so many farmers, collaborate with stakeholders all over the country, work with a lot of different national organizations was really a dream come true for me.
Well, great. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. It'll be exciting to see what happens in the next Farm Bill. I know things are already quite in flux with new amendments and things like that. So thank you so much for telling us your story.
You're welcome. Thank you.